Greetings, everyone. My name is Emily Louie, and on behalf of Campbell and Company, I would like to welcome you to Fundraising Communications 1, Defining Your Case for Support, the first webinar in our Fundraising Communications series. Thanks for joining us today. Moving to the next slide, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. First, please close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. Next, we recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. And if you experience any visual issues, please send a chat to Campbell and Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you'll earn 1 continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. In that same follow-up email, you'll also receive a link to download today's slides along with a link to the recording. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar, so please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We'll also hold time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to a presenter today, Andy Brommel, Director of Communications Consulting.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Brommel, and glad to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us. Let me just hide my webcam so I'm not distracted the whole time. All right, so very glad to be kicking off this year's webinar series today. This fundraising communications series is a real highlight of our year every year because we get to basically reflect on how we're working with clients around communications and case development and share that with everyone. It feels especially important this year where everyone's going through so much. We've been really working to share as much as we possibly can through webinars and articles and other resources. So, the chance to share some of these ideas with you, this is very close to our mission as a firm, the mission of our communications team, which I'm a part of. So it means a lot to us that you've joined us. So the webinar series, these really come from the experience of our communications team. We have a team of professionals who focus full time on helping organizations with case development, fundraising communications, how to communicate with donors. And so across all the organizations we work with, we see some very common, almost universal challenges that start from the recognition that fundraising is fundamentally a communications discipline. It's, finding an audience, communicating a message to them that hopefully inspires them to take a specific action. And every fundraiser is a part of that. Every fundraiser is a communicator in some way. But most fundraisers out there don't really have the kind of time, support, or resources to really help them in their communications roles. There's not a lot of, most of you never get a day to just step back from all your other responsibilities and really think about what your case for support is, how you communicate it, or practice communicating it. We just don't have the time. So, but our team, this is what we do. We do have the time, so we created some webinars. So this is going to be our series this year. This year we're going to do 5 webinars as part of the Fundraising Communications series. They all kind of build on each other, but it's fine if you miss one. They're all archived on our YouTube channel as we go. So if you miss one or can't attend, you can always go back and watch it. Some of these will be presented by me, others by other members of our communications team and some of our partners from the fundraising team at Campbell and Company. You see the topics here. Today is really the start with case for support. We'll be digging into messaging in the next one in December. Then we've got a session that's really around getting your volunteers on message and how to get them comfortable speaking in the language of your case for support. We're going to look at materials that support major gift cultivation, brochures, presentations, videos, digital tools, how to put together collateral and communications that help you solicit major gifts. And then finally, we're going to look at campaigns and kind of the full scope of campaign case development and communications. So, and the point of all of this is really just to help all of you be more effective, more comfortable, more confident expressing your organization's message in a philanthropic setting. This year, we've also added something new. We started this weekly article series where we do weekly articles on case development, donor messaging, communication strategy, all the stuff that we're covering in the webinars and a little bit more. I'd love if you find value in today's webinar, please do go sign up for this series. We've got great stuff coming out every week. We started this earlier this year in the middle of the pandemic. It just kind of felt like we wanted to share more, we wanted to do more for folks. So we've been putting out a new article every week, and it features a range of voices from across our communications team. As Emily mentioned, I hope you will ask questions as we go through the webinar. We'll have time for those at the end. Always get some nice questions in these, and it's good to have time for that. So let's dig in. I want to start today's session by asking you to think about your case for support in a specific way that might be a little different from how we typically think about your case for support. And first of all, even just looking at the word on the screen, case for support, I kind of wish we could just throw away this term. It's fundraising jargon. Anytime I'm in front of a board of directors talking about the case, I have to kind of start by saying, you probably don't know what this word means, but this is what it is. So it just, I don't want to get too hung up on it, but for professional fundraisers, when we think about a case for support, you probably think about a case statement in some kind of lengthy written form. And when you think about that, you probably feel a kind of anxiety because putting together a really long written document is painful for most of us, especially if you don't love writing or you don't love taking the document through editing by committee. So if you only take away one thing from this webinar, I want you to think about your case not as a long document, but as a set of messages that you communicate that prepares your prospects for solicitation. So forget about what document it lives in, just think about those core messages. And once you have a core of strong case messages, everything after that is really, it's kind of like riding a bike downhill. It gets a lot easier. When you have a strong set of foundational messages that make up your case for support, then it's a lot easier then to flow those into your annual appeals, to talking points for your leadership or your board members, getting them coached and trained on communicating the case, developing major donor cultivation materials, bringing philanthropic messaging into your organizational communications channels, your website, social media, other stuff. And then, of course, when you have a strong foundational case for support, you can then build on that for specific campaigns or special fundraising projects and initiatives. So, all this is easier when you really know what story you're trying to tell, what those core messages are. And strengthening your case for support, building those foundational messages, it might be the most powerful and least expensive way to elevate your fundraising program. Everything builds on it, it powers everything you do, every ask you make, and it doesn't necessarily cost money to have a better case. It really just takes time and effort, and you can do it. This is something that it's not magic. Every organization's case has something powerful about it that we can channel. Every organization's case has some tricky aspects that we need to think through how to manage or how to navigate. The real difference between organizations that have a really strong case or a really weak case, it has a lot more to do with just how much time and thought and energy they've put into developing and articulating their case, not something intrinsic to the organization or their mission. So today's session is really going to walk through how you can do that. We're going to start by looking at the fundamental ingredients of a case for support, which we call the 6 elements of your case for support. And I'll put them on screen here. 6 elements here, which we'll walk through. Context, what story are we in? The impetus, which is sort of the why now piece. Vision and plan, which is what will be different and what will we do to get there. Credential, why should you trust us? What's great about our organization? And the appeal, the ask, what are we asking you to do? So you can think of these as ingredients. You can use them in a lot of different ways. They're kind of like ingredients you would use in a bunch of different recipes. And you know, most recipes don't work if you're missing an ingredient, and better ingredients make for better food. So you work on getting these quality ingredients in place, and then it becomes a lot easier to build compelling communications recipes out of them. So think of these as kind of the core ideas that your case will express. You don't always need to use all of them in every single donor communication, especially for things like annual appeals. Those are not typically going through all this 6-point structure. But a strong case that's ready for major donor cultivation will generally include and address all 6 of these to some degree. And if you don't, it will, your case will have potentially a hole or a weakness in it. So they give you a structure for organizing your work on your case for support. You don't have to always go through them in exactly this order, but you want to kind of check each box and make sure you're thinking about each of them. So let's walk through what all 6 of these are, and then we're gonna actually build an actual case for an imaginary food bank as we go along. So the first element is context, and the question we're answering here is, what story are we in? What's the broader narrative in which this case has meaning? And it takes the form of framing information about the world around you that gives your case meaning. Think about this like the first 10 minutes of the movie, where you're getting all the exposition of the world, the characters, you know, before the inciting action takes place and the plot really starts moving. This is like how you set the story or set the context for the story that you're going to tell. Let's look at some examples. So let's say you have an arts program for children that you're trying to grow through a campaign. One way of framing and providing context for that might be to look at the broader educational system and say, you know, due to budget cuts, nearly 400,000 children in our schools now face an education without the arts. And then, so that would be the context, and then your specific intervention would be to say, you know, with your support, we will grow our Children in the Arts program to reach 5,000 kids in the years ahead. So the context is the gray box, the red box is kind of your vision statement. When I look at this, it makes sense. The context gives meaning to the vision, but to me, it makes it feel small, because 400,000, that feels really big, and 5,000 feels small by comparison. So let's say we flip it around a little bit. We're going to do the same exact case, but with a different context statement. Let's say the context here is more of a background story about the organization itself. Over the last 5 years, we've built the city's most exciting new arts education program, delivering measurable impact for every child as we've grown to reach 1,000 children every year. And now, with your support, we'll grow our Children in the Arts program to reach 5,000 kids in the years ahead. Okay, so all this, the red statement, totally the same. All we changed was the gray box. Part of this is, you see, you know, we've moved from more of a quantity framing of 400,000 to more of a quality framing, where we're saying we're not going to paint a picture that makes this feel like a drop in the ocean. We're going to talk about the quality of what we do, that it's the most exciting new program, it has measurable impact, and it's scaled up to 1,000. Now we want to go to 5,000. 5,000 feels big next to 1,000. Obviously, numbers are kind of funny that way. And the other thing you see here is that this context is more framed about kind of internal to the organization versus external statement about the surrounding educational system. So context, part of what you're doing here is deciding whether you want the story to be very externally framed or very more internally framed in your organization's story. And there's no like categorically correct answer to that. It's just what works best for your specific case. Let's look at another example here. This is going to be more of an organizational history type context. So our school is great today because every generation of parents and alumni has stepped up to invest in making us stronger for the next generation, and now it's our turn. So again, the context here is more of a statement about history. It's not about like, you know, what's going on in the community right now or what our competitor schools are doing or something. It's telling you a story that sets you up to feel a sense of obligation or responsibility to do something yourself. And if you've noticed on these last few slides, I'm making these out of different kinds of shapes and putting the shapes in relationship to each other. That's because the context is really what gives shape to your case. It's where you kind of set the larger narrative or dramatic arc of your case that begins with the context. So even though this is somewhat it's like basic expository information that you're working through in this section, it's really important how you frame it to what meaning your case ultimately has. So let's take a look at our imaginary food pantry here. Let's say that their context is in one of our city's wealthiest neighborhoods, 1 in 9 people struggle with poverty. Every year, thousands of our neighbors find themselves unable to afford food for themselves and their families. And then if you wanted, you could expand on this with more details or statistics or stories. You could talk about, you know, these are senior citizens living on fixed incomes. Maybe half of them have children under 18 of the people we serve. You know, you can fill in the picture more, but the basic context statement here is you're trying to paint a picture of a world and give people what they need to know that they might not know, which in this case, in this context, we're in a wealthy neighborhood. People don't realize there's poverty and people struggling with hunger. So the point of this context statement is to say like, hey, wake up, this problem is here, or like, this is right around us. These are people you see every day. All right, so we'll come back to that a little bit more as we go further. You'll see how this neighborhood food pantry builds across the 6 elements. Let's talk about impetus. This is really important because this is where we answer the question of why now? This is kind of like the moment in the first act of the movie where something happens that sets the whole plot into motion. And we accomplish that by using rhetorical devices that create a sense of moment and urgency. You'll see what we mean by rhetorical. It doesn't mean that it's not real. It's just that the language that you use around this, the way you actually word it, is really important in setting the kind of the emotional tone for your case. And when we talk about the impetus, this is where it becomes really clear. The enemy here is inertia. You're not competing against other organizations usually so much as you're just competing against the basic inertia that we all have. So when we're talking about asking people to give more, you're talking about behavior change. And that's hard. We're all creatures of habit. We're all comfortable doing the things that we do regularly. I feel like sometimes in fundraising, we act like people out there are just like waiting on pins and needles to hear our case. They're just like, they're a match waiting to be struck. As soon as they hear what we have to say, they're just going to be off to the races with giving. I don't think that's really how it is. I think most people are, if they don't know about us, if they're not thinking about us, they're quite comfortable. They're very comfortable not thinking about us. They're on a like decades long streak of not giving to us. So how do you break that streak? Or in a campaign, you have kind of a similar inertia dynamic where people are giving their annual gifts to you and they like that. They're happy. Maybe they give you $1,000 a year. That's great. But you want them to think about a $25,000 gift. What can you do that would overcome that inertia of giving $1,000 a year? Get them to think about something that they are not thinking about right now. That's where the impetus comes in. It's like the force that changes the direction of something. Sometimes staff members, I think, tend to underrate this because we tend to feel like our case is so worthy that once we express it, people are just going to immediately, change their behavior. But your volunteers, your board members, they will usually catch this. They'll be the ones to say, well, this case is all very good and everything we say is smart, but like, why now? Why? What's the urgency? So they're often a good check for this. Okay, so let's look at different ways of framing the impetus. Again, you have a lot of choices here. We have a whole article on this that goes into, my colleague Pat Chestnut wrote that like really goes into this in a lot more detail. I'm just going to give you the very simple overview. You have a couple choices. The first is whether you want to frame in terms of more of a negative impetus or a positive impetus, so more fear and hope. And again, you can mix these together in different ways, but you want to be thoughtful and intentional about what you're doing. The other axis that you're thinking about is the impetus coming from outside, more of an external sense of urgency, or is it more of an internal impetus that's coming more from your sense of like agency and will as an organization. And these create a little 2x2 matrix. So if you want an impetus where it's coming from outside and it's fear-based, that's basically a threat-based impetus. I'm going to show you 4 different ways of framing the impetus here for a theater that needs to build a new building. So the threat-based is, unless we can purchase and move to a new permanent home, the future of our theater and the community of artists that we support is at risk. So again, it's like coming from outside, there's an external threat we have to respond to. If you want to stay externally based, like if you respond to external circumstances, but have more of a positive thing, let's say it's more driven by a unique like real estate opportunity. You have this chance to acquire, a piece of land that's being given to you and you can build a new theater. So today we have a once in a generation chance to purchase the ideal home for our next act and bring our vision to a whole new stage. So it's much more positive, but it's still being spurred by an external thing. We have this external opportunity to acquire acquire some new land and build on it or something. What's it look like if the impetus is more coming from within? This is more when it's like our mission compels us, regardless of what's going on in the world around us. Like the reason we need to act is because of who we are and what we value and what our internal commitments are. So an internal version with kind of a negative edge to it is to frame it as like this big challenge we're making to ourselves. Today, we have a choice to meet this moment and step up to a whole new stage, a whole new level of production, or to let this moment pass us by. The negative aspect is you feel the risk. You feel the sense that like, if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're gonna fall short of our mission. We're gonna fall short of the challenge of delivering on our mission at the highest level. And we'll have let ourselves down. So it's like an internal impetus. Or if you want to make it, go full internal, full hopeful, positive, then it becomes more of a defining moment case. It's time to build the stage for bigger, bolder visions than ever before. So you can see any one of these could work, and they're all different colors because they kind of set the color or the tone for your case. So same campaign, 4 different versions of impetus. You have to think about what works best for you. Let's look at our food pantry. Let's see, what do we want to do there? Okay, so our food pantry is going to go with kind of a more of an external opportunity type impetus. Today, after 50 years of making do with rented spaces that were never designed for our mission, we have an opportunity to build a new permanent home. This is fundamentally a positive framing. You don't feel a huge sense of risk or threat in it. But the impetus is coming from outside in that they have a real estate opportunity, or they're trying to seize an external opportunity to move to a new location and build there. Again, you could then expand with more vivid details that make it feel urgent, talk about why it's so inadequate to be in rented spaces, how great it's going to be in a permanent home that they own. All right, let's keep rolling. So third element of case for support is vision. And we're answering the question of what will be different. What's the before and after? This is probably the most important, especially in a campaign context, because a vision is what makes a campaign a campaign. Annual giving can operate more on a kind of expressive level, people expressing their values and identity, but major giving and campaigns are really, that's about willing a different world into existence. So you need a depiction of a future state that your donor can picture in their mind, and it needs to be really simple, and making it simple is the hard part. But fortunately, this can take a lot of different forms. So here's an easy vision statement. Our vision is that we'll be able to accept every qualified student regardless of their family's means. Or we're going to build a new kind of museum for our community. Not just a new museum, but a whole new kind of museum. It can be very concrete. We're going to expand our program to reach 200 more families. Or it can be very lofty and like longer term. We're going to build a world without Alzheimer's disease. So what you see in all of these, some of them are more concrete and pragmatic. Some of them are very lofty. Some of them are very like short-term, immediate. Some of them are very longer term. Some might take 30 years to achieve. Some might be something you could do next year. But what they all have in common is that when you hear them, you get it. It doesn't take a lot of explanation. You can picture it in your mind. You feel drawn to it. You feel like you want to make that a reality, and you can remember it. It needs to be simple and memorable. So for our neighborhood food pantry, the vision here is going to be a new kind of food pantry that helps people chart a path out of poverty. Again, we'll expand that with vivid details that paint a fuller picture for the prospect. So this is it's a little more aspirational. It's not just like a purely concrete, we're going to serve 10,000 more pounds of food a week next year. Like it's not on a totally concrete level. It's sitting a little bit higher off the ground, but it's not like we're going to end hunger in our community once and for all. Like any one of those might be your vision, depending on what you're trying to do. But you can see where this is where this is aimed. So this is the vision. A different kind of food pantry helps people not just feed them today, but help them actually find a path out of poverty. So the kind of the sibling to the vision is the plan section, which is what will we do with your gift? It's like the saying, a vision without a plan is just a wish. That's the sort of thing you get to pretend is profound when you're a consultant. So the plan is what makes the vision more concrete. And this is really programmatic substance or detail that builds excitement and confidence. It makes the vision feel real. So we're not going to go into that much detail on this, but in a campaign, you often have an overarching vision and then multiple projects or plans that support that. So it's kind of a hierarchy of vision and plan. But really the question you're trying to answer is, what information does your donor need in order to invest? And so this really depends on the project, and it depends on the donor. There are projects where you don't need to provide much plan detail. There are campaigns where, especially building campaigns that have a lot of sort of technical details to them, where you're going to have a lot of plan content and detail. In that part of your case, it's going to be kind of long. So let's look at, if let's say you're a food bank, if you're just asking for an annual gift, a one-off gift, a monthly gift, you don't need to provide much of a plan. Just basic information on the food bank. Who do you serve? Maybe, how many meals does a gift of $100 buy? That might be the only plan level detail you need. If you're going up to a major donor for the food bank, you might need to provide more justification. Why is it that you need extraordinary help? How will it actually work to help people get out of poverty? How do I feel like I'm not just sort of throwing money into a black hole of social problems and need? What is your theory of change? So at higher giving levels, there's more of a demand for plan information. And if you work at an independent school, you have a parent audience that they know your organization so well. They're there every day. They have a ton of information. They're really loyal, passionate donors, but they are a high information audience that has a very high demand for plan level information. You cannot just say we're going to build a new thing, trust us. No, you have to give them all of this information because they expect it. So again, this really varies depending on the project. One thing we always like to point out is that you don't have to have everything absolutely nailed down. If you are, especially if you're in a feasibility study or you're just kind of early in the campaign, if you don't have all the details for the project, that's okay. Focus on the benefits of the project. So again, going back to our new theater example, maybe we don't have the blueprints, maybe we don't have the schematics and every little thing, we don't know exactly how many seats and exactly how many bathrooms, but we know that it's the top 5 benefits. It's going to ensure that our community has great theater for decades to come. It's going to enable us to double our education programs. It's going to take our stagecraft to a whole new level. It's going to give our audiences a much more comfortable experience, from the seating to the amenities, the restrooms, all that stuff. It's going to offer a much better working environment for our artists. So you can say that kind of stuff even while you're still nailing down all the architectural plans, and that's giving some level of plan. You can say, we're still planning, but these are the things we're planning around. The asterisks is that, you know what, even if you do have all the details, if you do have all the blueprints and everything nailed down, you still probably want to focus on those top 5 benefits, because that's actually what people can absorb. And then if they're really geeking out about it and they want to see, you know, every little detail, you can share that information with them. That's probably a good sign that you're pretty close to a successful ask. So for our food pantry, what's their plan? Remember, the vision is a place that helps people find a path out of poverty. So the plan is that our new permanent home be designed from the ground up for our mission. It'll be ready to meet the full need in our community, serve hundreds more people every week. And it's going to be built to connect our clients to a wide range of social services on site to help them chart a path out of poverty. And there's much more detail underneath that you can expand out of all of these things. That would be the next level of your case, but these are kind of the top benefits. All right, 5th element, the credential. Here we're just answering why us. And this is basically information about your organization that would ensure the prospect's trust and confidence. This tends to be the part that we're already good at. This is like when you ask folks, you know, why should I give to your organization? This is what we sometimes instinctively respond with. It's like, we're good at this, we won this award, we're respected for this. We just sort of give them our brag points. And that's part of the case, but you will note it is not the first part of the case. It's not the most important part of the case. You just need to have enough of this to basically make yourself feel credible, make people feel, you know, like they trust you to do the job. So you can frame this in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's about your uniqueness, the sense that, you know, no one else has the capacity to solve this, or the world needs us to do this thing. Sometimes it's around efficacy, looking at proof, outcomes, your kind of record of innovation. We never stop rethinking our program and strategy. Sometimes your credential is really around your values and integrity, the sense that, like, it's not just how much we do it, but it's how we do it. The fact that we take on the cases that other agencies run away from, or that everything we do is driven by our mission. So sometimes it's more of like a heart and values kind of credential. And sometimes it's about strength, like basically betting on a winner. You know, donors typically, you know, they want to feel that they're investing in a winning organization and cause. So talking about the fact that the school we love is stronger than ever, or we're building on success, and here's our kind of momentum and track record, that can help build the credential, make you feel trustworthy to invest, you know, $100,000 in, or whatever the ask is. You know, this can quickly get into like laundry lists of all your favorite brag points. So, you know, you probably want some of that, but also really helps to look for examples or stories that bring your credential or your heart and soul, why you're trustworthy, that bring that to life. So some examples that these are from some cases that we've done over the years. This was back after the last recession now, or two recessions ago. So this credential was when the recession hit and media outlets across the country faced extraordinary new pressures. Some of them failed, some of them cut back, and others went heavy on opinion and entertainment. But we decided to go all in on serious journalism. So this was a public media organization. And this was sort of a credential statement that shows the integrity of their mission, why they're trustworthy, why you would want to trust your money with them. Or here's another one. When our elected leaders wanted to initiate a citywide discussion on police community relations, they turned to our university to lead it. So sometimes the credential, like the trustworthiness, is sort of transferred from other trusted figures. So here, like, city leaders trusted us, so you should trust us. Right? Having quotes and testimonials can be part of your credential in this way. For our neighborhood food pantry, what's their credential? What would make us trust them with a major gift? Over 50 years of service to our community, we've built one of the largest food pantries in the city and a model for pantries across many other neighborhoods. We've helped tens of thousands of people keep their children from going to school hungry, live with dignity in old age, or get back on their feet after an unexpected job loss. And then you might expand this with a few more stories or statistics. You might get an endorsement or a testimonial from the mayor or from a local business leader, or whoever can confer trustworthiness on your organization. Final element, what is the appeal? Can't forget this part. What are we asking the donor to do? The thing to remember here is that there's a lot of different ways to ask, and the way you frame the solicitation actually is kind of about casting the donor in a specific role. So that can take a lot of different forms. It can be, we're asking you to give back, to leave a legacy, to be a leader, to be part of the solution, to join us and be part of a collective effort, to live and express your values through your giving. In a major giving setting, you're going to very much tailor this to what you think really drives the individual that you're talking to. When you have to print a brochure, you kind of have to pick one and use it for everyone. So, I don't want to dig into this too much, but the ask has a specific flavor and unique quality to it, depending on how you frame the appeal. So for our neighborhood food pantry, we're going to say this is their ask is to step up today to help thousands of our neighbors build a path out of poverty. So that's a very simple sentiment. It is reiterating the vision statement, a path out of poverty. The key word is probably our neighbors, like it's saying, don't you think of yourself as a good neighbor? Don't you think of yourself as the kind of person who wouldn't let a neighbor starve? Don't you want to step up and say, I am that kind of person? So there's a bit of you're casting the donor in the role of good neighbor in this ask. So, okay, these are the 6 elements that we've just kind of breezed through. One thing you might notice is that they kind of go together. Context and impetus are really the why. Vision and plan is like the what we're going to do. And the credential and appeal are really the who of this story. Who's going to do this good work? It's us, the organization, and you working arm in arm. So if 6 elements, kind of a lot to remember. If you just want to think on a broader level, it's the why, the what, and the who of your case. So this is the part in the cooking show where we've walked through all the steps, and now we're going to pull out the finished dish that we prepared earlier. I want to bring it all together and show you a simple presentation version of what that neighborhood food pantry case could look like. So we're going to dim the lights, and I'm going to go into performance solicitation mode here for a minute. In one of our city's wealthiest neighborhoods, 1 in 9 people struggle with poverty. They're senior citizens on fixed incomes, forced to choose between medicine and food. They're parents who are skipping meals so their children won't go to school hungry. They're people trying to stay afloat after an unexpected job loss or medical crisis. Half the people we serve have children under 18. Half of them have an education beyond high school, and they cross all boundaries of race, background, age, and health. For 50 years, they've come to count on our neighborhood food pantry to give them healthy, fresh food when they need it, and to treat them with dignity. With the support of our community over the years, we've built a model for food pantries across our city, with professional staff, with reliable, healthy food, innovative home delivery programs that reach seniors and people with disabilities, and with extensive connections to other social services in our community. Yet we've never had a facility that truly supports the work we do and the people we serve. For the last 50 years, we've been making do with rented spaces that were designed for other things. When you see people lined up out onto the street in the middle of winter, or you see our staff trying to have private consultations with clients in a shared office, you see the limitations of our space. But today we have an opportunity to build and own a permanent home for our mission. And we're not just looking to build a bigger and better food pantry. We're ready to build a new kind of food pantry, a place that welcomes everyone in our community who needs us, that treats them all with dignity, and helps them chart a path out of poverty. Our new home will be designed from the ground up for our mission, with all the food storage and processing space we need, as well as private spaces for clients to meet with our staff. With our partners, we'll also be able to host classes on healthy eating, career coaching, and navigating social services like employment, housing, healthcare. We'll finally be able to meet the full need in our community, serving hundreds more people every week and helping people chart a path out of poverty. But like everything we've done to support our neighbors over 50 years, this vision depends on you. So we're asking you to step up today to help thousands of our neighbors build a path out of poverty. Okay, scene, lights back up. That's like a 3-minute case that does touch on all 6 of the elements. Any one of those parts, like you could easily expand out if someone's interested, if they have questions, you could go into more detail. That was kind of a speechy video voiceover kind of version. You could imagine more of a brochure version where you're kind of laying those points out from one spread to the next. You could imagine pulling different kinds of social media or magazine articles out of those. So again, we have that core message. You can do all kinds of different things with it, but having that core storyline really gives you a good running start. It's also, you may notice, like it's all written in pretty like normal person language, conversational language. You could walk through that and share those talking points with your board of directors, your campaign committee, and get them comfortable speaking in their own version of those messages. So when we talk about building a case out of very simple messages and making sure you're covering all of the different elements, that's what we mean, just making sure that you have clear, simple conversational language that addresses each of those 6 points. Let's talk a little bit about how you get there. And really just a few thoughts here on process. Case development is a journey you can take in a lot of different ways, very flexible. But typically you want to involve the people who you want to own and use the case. So that means your leadership, it means some of your fundraising staff, it very much means your board members and campaign committee members, your fundraising volunteers. So you can't just like go hide in your office and write this and then go put it in people's hands. You actually have to have a process where they are having generative discussions with you, they're reviewing drafts, you know, they're part of the process and they see their own fingerprints on it at the end. When you have people involved, you want to walk them through, basically you can go through the 6 elements and ask the questions that go with each of those elements and facilitate a structured discussion of the key questions in the case. We would really encourage you to not write anything long until you have the core messages really nicely distilled. You're probably best off just sticking to like a 1 or 2 page, really simple outline of a case, or like a presentation type flow, like we just walked through. You know, do something in a very simple distilled format before you try to go write a 12-page, you know, brochure copy or narrative case statement. When you're writing in long formats, it's way too easy to not you can dodge the question or the challenge of committing to core messages. And finally, you want to test your case. This can take a lot of different forms, from more formal things like a campaign feasibility study, where you do interviews and focus groups and surveys and things like that, or it can just be something, you know, you do yourself, where you bring it to some different test groups of donors and people who you trust and who know the organization well. You can do a survey, you can do, you know, some focus group sessions with some board members and donors and volunteers. But you really want to like let people hear it, interact with it, surprise you with their feedback. You got to see what works, because we're never able to guess just based on our own intuitions from working inside the organization. Again, when you're doing case development, you do not have to write a traditional case statement. You should use a vehicle for that process that suits you. We love simpler formats like a 1-pager, or where you're just really committing to 3 to 6 key messages and some frequently asked questions. This can feel kind of like a cheat sheet, or maybe you're just trying to distill the elevator speech. You know, any really strong case can be boiled down to a one-pager. Often that's actually the hardest part of the process, is distilling it. So basically, if you can get the one-pager version working, all the rest is going to be easy. The case brief, this is a little bit more of this is maybe like our kind of compromise with the traditional narrative case statement, where you're doing maybe a 2 to 8 page narrative case that has a balance of strong messaging and headlines, simple copy, some stories, some statistics, can be designed or lightly designed. This is something that will work a little bit better as a leave behind for donor conversations. Or maybe you do a presentation version. This is our personal favorite. This is most of our client work. We develop the case through a presentation format, 10 to 20 slides, very simple messages. You use graphics and visuals and photography and design elements to reinforce the core message. And you keep it conversational. You use language that, the reason we love this format is because it forces you to use language that works out loud. It's a real bummer when you are getting excited to go raise money and then you give people a case statement that has all this beautifully written language that only works in writing, or that only works on a page, and is just, doesn't work in conversation. So presentation formats tend to help you steer clear of that problem. And in our article series, we actually just did an article a couple weeks ago that was called the Perfect Deck for Zoom Cultivation. So we were actually looking at how do you do a presentation deck version of a case that works great for cultivating folks over video conferencing. All right, so we've got some time here. I'd love to see if we have some questions, and then we'll wrap up with a few closing thoughts. Emily, do we have some questions from the audience?
We do. Our first question is, so many case statements start off with reference to the institution's history. Do you find this effective?
No. I'm glad you brought this up. We joke about this a little bit. It's like any case that starts with, for the last 200 years, like, if you really have a impressive history, and if that history is the main reason that people support you, if what they're giving to is basically historical preservation, then history is maybe the thing you would lead with. Otherwise, your history is part of your credential. It's how you potentially demonstrate longevity, track record, trustworthiness. Like, if you can credibly say, we weren't born yesterday. We've been doing quality work in this community for 50 years. Like you saw in the food bank example, we do mention that they've been there for 50 years. So it is part of it, but we don't start with that, because nobody cares. Like, I want to give to the world's most historic food bank. That person doesn't exist. So yeah, you use it as part of your credential. And just to even generalize a bit more, you usually don't lead with your credential. You're usually leading with context and impetus, or sometimes with vision, where you just start by like declaring, we're going to put a man on the moon, and like that's how you open the communication. That can be very powerful. You're usually going to start with context, impetus, or vision. Credential is either going to come into play later, or sometimes you kind of sprinkle it throughout. Like you try to sprinkle kind of qualifying, confidence building proof points throughout the flow, and you may not even have like a credential section. It's just kind of woven throughout. So it's a very common mistake to really overplay the credential or act like, because what that reflects is like the staff perspective that's like, we're so good and worthy that everyone owes us money. Like, and that's just, we know that's not how people actually make giving decisions, but it's sometimes we fall into that because we work there, we're proud of the organization, we just kind of have that bias. So I love that question. Thank you for asking that.
Great. Our next question is, has there been any research done on what context is most effective for fundraising results?
I'm sorry, could you say, I missed one word of that. Have there been any recent what?
Has there been any research done on what context is most effective for fundraising results?
Okay. Let me think about that. So when you look at, I think that there's stronger persuasion research around the question of impetus, and or specifically around the question of kind of hope versus fear and positive versus negative. And what we see there is that there's an easy level of, there's a pretty high risk of fatigue with threat-based messaging. And so if you're framing your context and impetus, remember those two kind of work together. If you're framing your context in impetus in a way that's like really heavy on the negative, you really risk, like people just emotionally will tune out because we don't like to read stuff that's upsetting and makes us feel hopeless. So if you're using negative messaging, you have to be really careful that it ultimately leads to a sense that there's still a sense of agency and power for the donor. So that's really that's the research that I would have in mind when we're looking at context and impetus. I mean, there's other like just sort of psychology research that about, especially around like how people process numbers, where you have anchoring effects. Like that's why I would not say, 400,000 kids are missing out on arts education and then say we're going to serve 5,000, because just by introducing 400,000, there's an anchoring effect that like set next to which 5,000 then looks tiny. So if there's a lot of research on anchoring effects and how people evaluate the size of and scope of things. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is full of just all the most interesting stuff in that regard. That's just a wonderful book. So there's some research here. A lot of it will feel kind of intuitive, and it affects, I would say, both context and impetus.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what considerations should be made to making sure the organization isn't marginalizing or tokenizing its clients?
Oh boy, I mean, this is a whole set of really important questions that so many people are thinking about, writing about, and building expertise around. Let me think about a few things this is a whole topic unto itself. So I don't want to underdo this question. We just put out an article last week called it's called On Worthiness and How You Avoid the Sort of Individual Charity Model Trap. This is one article we've just shared that really you have to be careful about framing your sense of people's worthiness to receive support, and moving from a more individual framing of how people end up in conditions like poverty or homelessness, moving to more systemic and more sophisticated and less individualized ways of framing those issues. And so that's one piece of it. There are important considerations around how you use stories, how you get consent from people to share their stories, and whether in certain cases it's even appropriate to share people's stories if they give you consent. So my goodness, there's important considerations around how you frame the donor's role so that you're not falling into a like hero donor, white savior kind of pitfall. There's considerations around language and how you using people first language, using language that conveys the inherent dignity, especially when you're conveying urgency and agency, making sure that you're depicting the people you serve as having agency and not always being just like having things happen to them or having things done to them. So I'm just riffing here. There's so much around this question that we are digging into and writing about. We may have future webinars that dig into this topic more specifically, but I really appreciate the question. I think this is something that every organization needs to be thinking about. There's so many risks here to sort of the older models of charity and how we depict the people we serve.
Great, thank you. Our final question is, how much should a pitch now focus on the pandemic and moment we are in? How do you weave in the here and now without being too threat oriented?
Yeah, that's we're as you might imagine, we're working through this with organizations right now, and There are, of course, it depends. There are if it depends on what you're asking for, what you're actually trying to achieve through your fundraising. If what you're fundraising for is basically pandemic response, and is very tied to that context, then of course your context and impetus and your vision is going to be really specific to that. And that's sort of the easy answer. But there are a lot of organizations, maybe this is you, who have a different case where like what you're raising money for is not just limited to pandemic response, or maybe isn't even really related to that at all, but you don't want to feel totally, I don't know, tone deaf or like disconnected. So in those cases, you want to look for ways to connect your mission to the moment. Look for ways in which the challenges of the pandemic reinforce or reveal aspects of your mission that are relevant to your case for support. In what ways does the pandemic highlight the relevance and impact of your work? As you look at your credential, I think there's a lot of like pandemic-related credentialing that we can do. If you can show, here's how we have been adapting and responding in the pandemic, that shows the integrity of our mission and shows our innovation and kind of, it helps build our credential as an organization. That can be part of it as well. But I think there are a lot of cases out there, a lot of the ones that we're working on, that touch on the pandemic, that weave it in as sort of an intensifier or an element of the story, but that are pretty clear about not overly tying it to the pandemic if the actual giving project isn't totally specific to the pandemic. I don't know if that entirely helps, but I think there are a lot of campaigns, a lot of cases out there right now where the correct balance is to weave it in and mention it and be relevant to it without necessarily having your case be limited to it, unless you're really just doing pandemic response.
Great, thank you so much, Andy, and thank you all for submitting your questions.
Yeah, these are great questions. If there are other questions, we'll get back to you by email. So please feel free. I'll put up my email address here at the end. So just a couple final thoughts. If you found a value in this session, I really hope you'll come back and check out the rest of the series. Our next session in December is called Donor Messages That Resonate. And that's where we basically take all these like big ideas around the 6 elements and dig into much more detail around how you craft them into clear, simple messages. How do you take those big ideas and get them down to one sentence that absolutely pops? So it's a lot of writing tips. We show a lot of before and afters, like here's the crappy version, and then here's what you can distill it down to. So it's a fun session. I always enjoy that one. And again, our article series I mentioned, please do go and sign up. We'd love for you to not miss any of these. We're writing every week. And just on the stuff that we've talked about in today's webinar, just a few articles that relate to this. You'll receive this this deck as a PDF. You can click on these as links, but we have articles that go into the 6 elements, the 4 verbs that should live in every fundraiser's lexicon. This one's all about impetus, how to craft a case that sparks action, how to get your case down to 6 messages or less, how to work on visioning from both like concept and process, how to build consensus without writing by committee. That's the bane of every case development process. So we've got an article about that. And these are just a sampling. There's probably 24 articles in there at this point, and we'll keep writing. So again, any further questions, send me an email. We'll get back to you. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope we all have a good rest of the week. Thanks, folks.